Hey guys, I want to begin with an apology. I fully realize that you don't come to this channel for Dharma teachings. I know that you come to this channel for my measured and constructive criticism of many different YouTube personalities and intellectuals in that space. I know you want this constructive criticism, but unfortunately, as I was looking at the regular suspects of Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson and some other guys I was considering, I just wasn't inspired to do a regular video. It's just not in me to do a regular video. I apologize about that, and we will be back to regular programming next month. But this month, sometimes I go through periods where I become very sort of religious, or when I become very preoccupied with Buddhism, with Buddhist teachings, and I just spend a lot of time contemplating it and reading books and watching YouTube videos and so on. And so we find ourselves in this situation right now. Right now, all I'm thinking about is the Buddhist definition of suffering, and I want to share it with other people. I want to share it with other people not because I'm a great authority of Buddhism, not because I know everything to know about Buddhism. I don't want to put on any responsibility on myself. I don't want to present myself as an expert. What I am is a melancholy Buddhist, somebody who really struggles and engages with the Buddhist teachings, to the best of my ability. And so I just want to present, Buddhism as I see it, and maybe this would be insightful for you or interesting, an introduction to ideas you haven't heard before. I'm definitely not here to try to make anybody into a Buddhist. I'm not a missionary. I'm not a zealous Buddhist who wants to convert everybody. Those barely exist anyway. And so, here it is, my friends. I hope this is going to be worth your time. So when the Buddha was asked to summarize his teachings, he said, help others if you can. If you can't help others, at least don't harm them, and purify the mind. Buddhism can get very complicated and has a rich philosophy, and I welcome that complexity, and I welcome the beauty of Buddhism. However, it's also important to remember the basics. If somebody asks you, what do Buddhists believe? They believe that help others if you can. If you can't help others, don't harm them, and purify the mind. The Four Noble Truths is considered the first Buddhist teachings, though some scholars dispute this, but traditionally it's viewed as Buddha's first teaching after obtaining enlightenment. And in the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha outlines why we need to work with our mind. So the Four Noble Truths are known as the Four Noble Truths because they make you noble from a Buddhist point of view. These are the views held by noble beings, by beings who have attained enlightenment, awakening. And so by adopting these noble truths, by integrating them into our view, we also become noble. So that's the idea. Actually, the word used there is Aryan. Aryan, of course, like the swastika, which is actually a symbol in Buddhism and Jainism. Of course, the word Aryan today we associate with the Third Reich. But, here it's referring to people to beings that are noble. And the potential for you to become a noble, enlightening being also begins with the contemplation and the adoption of the Four Noble Truths into your life. So before jumping into the Four Noble Truths, let me wave my vaping device a little bit as I describe to you what a Buddha actually is, as best as we can know. So Buddha is a being who has awakened. A Buddha is not a creator God. He did not create the universe. He did not create cyclic existence. A Buddha is not a prophet of God. A Buddha is an awakened being that through practice of meditation, mindfulness, and austerities obtain awakening. The Buddha sees things as they are. And so he sees them as impermanent, as being empty of inherent existence, and an awakened mind doesn't grasp for impermanent things, doesn't rarefy objects, and so a Buddha stops generating karma, and the Buddha goes beyond cyclic existence. And a Buddha is motivated by compassion, and I should say defined by compassion, not motivated, but defined by compassion. And what a Buddha does is teach others how to obtain this state. So the texts are quite clear, and they say that the Buddha cannot erase your negative karma, and a Buddha cannot transfer his enlightenment, his awakening to others. So, again, the Buddha is not a creator God, doesn't have the powers of a creator God, but what a Buddha can do is teach others, and a Buddha is supposed to automatically know the inclinations of different disciples or different people who come to him, and being able to communicate and give them the appropriate teachings. The Buddha never imposes his views on others. According to the teachings, once the Buddha obtained enlightenment, he thought he can just go and meditate and be alone in the forest, and so the gods, the Hindu gods, appealed to him to teach the Dharma. And the premise there is that the Dharma can only be taught when somebody has asked for it. Like, kind of nobody asked for this video on my channel, so maybe I'm breaking the law here by talking about it. But that kind of in a few words is who Buddha is. Buddha cannot cannot be a savior in the way that Christ can for Christians. A Buddha, primarily is a teacher and an inspiration and an extraordinary being. The Buddha is the highest manifestation of the potential of a mind. So the important thing to understand is that while, my mind is different from the mind of the Buddha, of course, has went beyond cyclic existence, etc. But they're not fundamentally different in a sense that they're not like completely different species, the mind of an ordinary sentient beings and the mind of the Buddha. Because within the mind of an ordinary sentient beings, there is such a thing in Mahayana Buddhism. Again, I'm teaching from the point of view of Mahayana Buddhism, but the belief that there is Buddha nature within us, that our mind has the potential of great luminosity, our mind has the potential to be as vast as space, and this potential makes us suitable students of the Buddha. So, like in theistic religions, you can become one with God depending on the theology, but you're not actually ever going to be God. Whereas in Buddhism, in Mahayana Buddhism, you have the full potential to become a Buddha, but that Buddha is not a creator God type figure. A Buddha cannot just sort of completely save you, regardless of the circumstances, in a way that a Christian God can. So Buddha doesn't become one with the universe, and a Buddha doesn't become one with everything. That's kind of like New Agey type language that doesn't appear anywhere in Buddhist texts. There's nothing there about becoming one with the universe or becoming one with everything. Buddha is a state of mind. It's the ultimate state of mind that can be achieved. And so if you imagine that there's 2 glasses of water, and one glass has clean water in it, and the other glass has dirty water in it, the glass with the dirty water, by which I mean here the mind of a regular sentient beings, it has the full potential for clarity. Even as it's murky and dirty, it has a full potential to be filtered down and to become clean and pure in the way that the Buddha's mind is. So from what I'm telling you, I'm sure you've gathered by now that the Buddha is not a singular person. When we talk about the Buddha, we're talking about a historical figure who lived 2,500 years ago, And he is the most important Buddha of our age because he is the one who introduced the teachings. He introduced the Dharma for others. But from the point of view of Mahayana Buddhism, there have been Buddhas after him. Like one example could be Nagarjuna, the famous monk philosopher. He's who elucidated the teachings on emptiness. So he's often considered the second Buddha. And there is local enlightened beings in Tibet, like Yogi Milarepa, the practitioner scholar Jie Tsongkhapa, the founder of the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism, is considered to be a Buddha. There are female Buddhas like Green Tara, and female yoginis who are considered to be Buddhas. So a Buddha is a description of not just of a single person, but when we talk about the Buddha, we're naturally talking about the historical Buddha, Buddha Shakyamuni, even though the Buddhas that came after him are equal to him in their enlightenment. He is the most important Buddha because he introduced the teachings to us. And the teachings, the word Dharma has different actually definitions. One of which is phenomenon, but one of which is also as is, things as they are, Dharma, as is. Like you could say Christ Dharma, Christ reality for Christians, and so there is a saying in Buddhism, if the Buddha never came, the Dharma would still be there. So here it's a little bit like saying like math is there whether the discipline of math exists or not. Mathematics is there kind of everywhere. In the jungle of the Amazon, wherever it is, math is there. But you need a mathematician to actually turn it into words and turn it into a discipline. And so in this instance, when the karma of a particular time and place is good, a Buddha appears there and teaches the Dharma. But the Dharma is actually always there anyway. But the Buddha explicitly teaches it and creates a discipline to follow out of his great compassion. All right, my friends, so for those of you still watching, let's actually jump into the Four Noble Truths, okay? So the first noble truth is the truth of suffering. Life is suffering is the way that it's usually translated. Okay, life is suffering is the first noble truth. The second noble truth is the origin of suffering is attachment, clinging, attachment. Okay, so that's the second noble truth. The third noble truth is the truth of cessation. Cessation is possible. And then the fourth noble truth is the Eightfold Path, which consists of right view, right resolve, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and the right meditative absorption. And so the easiest way to remember the Four Noble Truths is actually the way they're being taught by Guy Newland. He's a Buddhist scholar, and when he introduces Buddhism to his classes, he uses the example of Dr. Buddha. So that's, if you want to, maybe you're not interested in Buddhism and you're going to forget most of what I say here, but if you want an easy way to remember the Four Noble Truths, think about Dr. Buddha. So Dr. Buddha first outlines the illness. He gives the origin of where the illness came from in the second noble truth. In the third noble truth, he said that the cure is possible. And in the fourth noble truth, he provides the Eightfold Path, the exercise regimen about how to get rid of the illness. The medicine is the fourth noble truths. So it's important to think about Dr. Buddha because then we're not thinking about Buddha being like a prophet of a god, or Buddha being a creator god. No, the Buddha is an awakened being who, out of his compassion, teaches us how to reach his state of enlightenment. So another way to remember the Four Noble Truths is this cause and effect. So the first truth the life is suffering, it's the effect of attachment. So first comes the effect, then the origin of that effect, the cause, which is clinging attachment, and then the fourth noble truth is the cause of an effect of cessation. So the third noble truth, cessation of pain, is possible. So, this is very kind of provocative, the first noble truth, kind of a slap on the face, to say that life is suffering, a kind of a provocative statement that many people would disagree with. But actually, if you look closer, or at least the way I understand the first noble truth, is to understand that the word dukkha that was used is actually presents a span of experiences. So dukkha, the word for suffering, includes tiny dissatisfaction, and it also includes within it complete misery. So the Buddha didn't teach that life is unbearable misery. In fact, if a person exists in unbearable misery, they can't practice the Dharma, obviously. So the Buddha didn't say that life is unbearable misery, but he did teach that there's a continuum of suffering and dissatisfaction, a kind of unease that goes through our life. So the way I look at the first noble truth is this: for as long as you don't work with your mind, there's going to be a continuum of dissatisfaction and misery in your life. Now, at certain periods of your life, this dissatisfaction may be very mild and inconsequential, and then at other periods of your life it could become unbearable. But from my point of view, a good time to practice letting go, a good time to practice not clinging, not attaching to things too much, is when things are going well. Because then when you're really hit with something where you lose somebody or something horrible happens and you need to let go of something significant, your mind is already prepared to to let go, because life will force you to part with things, whether you're a Buddhist or not. That seems to me what happens to people in life. And so might as well prepare when times are good. That's kind of the way I look at it. But I don't view the first noble truth as saying that life is unbearable misery. That's not how I view the first noble truth. And I think I'm in the mainstream with that, though you're welcome to look around at different sources. So I came up with a couple of examples of how clinging attachment to external things causes suffering, dukkha. And so let's jump into the first one, all right, my friends? So imagine that you're on a diet, and you're on a diet and you're watching what you eat, you try to be healthy, but you really love fast food. And so on Friday after work, you go to a fast food place and you don't care about calories, you take as much food as you like, and you go home and you eat it. So here, for the duration of the week, you're kind of looking forward to Friday. And then when Friday comes, you get the fast food, you go home, you turn on Netflix, you turn on YouTube, and you eat the food, and you're so kind of distracted that you barely experience the food that much because your attention is elsewhere. And then when you're done, you feel a little bit full, So this is an example of clinging to food, investing so much of your energy into food. And then, once you're done eating, another weekend begins, and another cycle of thinking about fast food throughout the whole week continues. And then you buy the food again, and then you barely taste it, and it's gone. So the reason I kind of came up with this example is to show how dukkha, how suffering, can be very mild. It doesn't have to be something draconian. There's nothing. You're not in some sort of a horrible situation. you know, but if you kept in mind that most of the time, we eat for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes tops, um, maybe you shouldn't invest so much of yourself and invest so much of your time and effort, clinging to this one day of the week. So this is just kind of an example of how, you could say, I'm gonna have that day on Friday, but I'm not gonna fixate. I'm not gonna cultivate the attachment to food throughout the week, so that I can lead a fuller life, not being fixated on food. But this is like the kind of dissatisfaction that we often experience relative to things, that's very mild, and the word suffering is too much, but this would still be an example of dukkha. So you're experiencing the dukkha, when you're longing for that fast food burger. It's always on your mind throughout the days, and you're kind of living in anticipation of this one event. So the solution is not to become a Buddhist and never enjoy food or anything, but that's just kind of an example of how clinging brings dissatisfaction throughout the week and makes Friday into this magical event, and then you eat the food and you barely even taste it. So maybe kind of relaxing about it, say maybe I'll eat at home Friday, or it's not going to be a big deal if I don't get this one meal. So it's just about fixating on things, and you've probably experienced fixating on trivial things like that, food or something else, or clothes. But anyway, so let's move on to my second example. So in the second example, you are a factory worker in a small town, and you've been with the company for 20 years. You expect to retire with this company. You have loyalty to your employer. You barely take any time off because you're so committed to your job. And then one day the factory closes, leaves town, and you're out of the job. So here we have to understand that, attachment is not some sort of a sin in Buddhism. It's understandable that a person in that situation would feel sad. When I was growing up in Russia, the Soviet industry collapsed, and hundreds of thousands of workers who worked their whole life at a factory found themselves without a job. And for many people, it's understandable that their identity was connected with their employer. Their sense of self was connected with their factory, with their employer. And some people started drinking and, were completely crushed by this. And so the question here is not whether this is natural to cling to something like this. It's completely understandable. The issue is that, everything in life is impermanent. And at one point or another, it ends. And it doesn't always end on our terms, the way we want it to happen. And so, for me, again, kind of going back to this idea, if you come to a factory worker like that and say, hey, why don't you let go of this? There might not be another industry in this town, and you might need to leave to go elsewhere for a job. That would be very cruel. But when I myself find myself cornered like that by something, letting go sometimes is the only thing you can do, and the only thing that makes sense to do. And it makes sense to not cling to things so much in the beginning, so that at the end you're not. It's almost like we have a favorite sofa or something, and we decided to not part with it, and we decided to super glue our hand to the sofa. And that's understandable, and it's natural. Clinging to things is natural. But is this does it does it make sense, or does it make sense to have a more relaxed, detached attitude toward things? So like if you can have a happier life. And I think a lot of people who are happy in life, some of them might be happy because they had an easy life. Some people genuinely have easy lives. But a lot of the time is that they intuitively let go without any kind of Buddhist jargon, or without being Buddhists, or people just kind of learn to let go, and they can live through the deaths of their relatives, through separations, through different types of suffering, because of that attitude. So I think a lot of the people who are happy in life, are happy because they intuitively let go of things and people when the time comes. So in my final example of clinging and suffering, I'd like to present an example of a couple that has been together for 50 years, and then one member of the couple dies, and the other one is alone. And sometimes there is such a thing called failure to thrive, when people have been together for so long that when one dies, the other one also dies. And sometimes it could be a peaceful thing, but sometimes it could be filled with depression and misery. And so here again, impermanence. We all like impermanence when it suits us, when you want to graduate from college, or when you want to find a new job, or when you get paid, because of impermanence, of course. Time flies by and you get paid. But in certain other events, like in certain other situations, like being a part of a couple, you want things to continue forever. Well, unfortunately they don't. And so again, you can live a life with a person, love them dearly, but you can love them in a way that your happiness is not defined by this one relationship, no matter how good it is. When you don't cling to things or to people because they're impermanent. It's like the monk Thich Nhat Hanh said, that to love somebody is to have them be free. The Buddhist definition of compassion is wishing others not to suffer, and the Buddhist definition of love is wishing others happiness. So you can, wish your partner happiness, maybe even if they leave you, you can still wish them happiness with another person. But in any case, of course it's natural to invest so much into these relationships for people, but just because it's natural doesn't mean that it's, the best idea. And so I think you can still be with somebody, you can still love them without clinging to them. So it's natural when hearing the Four Noble Truths to think that Buddhism is about detachment. But actually that's not true. Detachment is an aspect of Buddhism. Obviously the Buddha started a monastic order, so the Buddhist expression, the word that's used is renunciation. So renunciation is a part of Buddhism. The monks and nuns, they turn their back on relationships, they turn their back on money, they turn their back on the idea of social status. I mean, if they're good monks and nuns, which as you can imagine not everybody is, but that's only the foundation. Turning away from cyclic existence doesn't mean becoming a zombie without any passion or without any enjoyment of life. I think that Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher, German philosopher, I think he had kind of this idea of Buddhism as a form of stoicism, where you just cut yourself off from pleasure and you become kind of numb. like a zombie, something like that. But in reality, renunciation is just a foundation for practicing the Dharma. It's a foundation, of course, if you want to dedicate your life to practicing Buddhist teachings, then naturally becoming a monk or a nun makes sense. You are giving up all of it, but there is also there's an exciting life for monastics. They get to study the Buddha's teachings, they get to study the philosophy, they get to have time to meditate. So it's actually, a full life, a monastic. And, it's quite clear in the texts that somebody could be a very good monk, not having thoughts about somebody who has perfected renunciation, somebody who has given up on, the pleasures of the world, but that in and of itself will not make you enlightened. Renunciation is just the foundation. And so in the life of a layperson, it makes sense to take the middle way, where you're not going to become a nun or a monk. It's not a good idea for everybody. But at least you can turn away from certain aspects of the world and not invest yourself so much into it, because ultimately the truth comes from working with the mind, not by seeking pleasure in the external world. So there is, people might think, Buddhism is a pessimistic religion. Buddhism is pessimistic about the ability to achieve long-term happiness without working with your mind. But it's also kind of one of the most optimistic religions when it comes to the human potential, the potential of our mind to, obtain awakening. So it's wrong to think of Buddhism as a religion of renunciation, but it's obviously a religion that's also sustained by renunciates. It's sustained at its core by monks and nuns. So detachment is not the goal. Detachment is just the foundation for working with your mind, and for those monks and nuns who are good monks and nuns, they live very full lives. They don't live lives of kind of detached, zombie-like, like a numbness. That's not the idea at all. All right, my friends. Well, I can ramble on forever about Buddhism, but I think I'm sure you're running out of time and patience with me. So I'll just conclude in talking about the fourth noble truth, the Eightfold Path. I want to conclude with a few thoughts about two aspects of the Buddhist path that are best known in the West, which is mindfulness and meditation. So these are the two things that I'm going to talk about here. A lot of the Eightfold Path kind of folds into the category of don't harm others. So I'm not going to go through each one of these, but that's the important foundation. Don't harm others and help others when you can. So let's say a few words here about mindfulness. So the idea that many people learn about mindfulness and the way kind of the corporate mindfulness movement, usually it has to do with just shutting down conceptual thought and being in the present moment. So, this is beneficial to many people. Many people like this idea of mindfulness, and it's kind of connected to Zen Buddhism. And so, I think that's also a good idea, to practice this kind of mindfulness if you like. But the fuller definition of mindfulness in Buddhism is to observe your emotions and not be defined by them, and cultivating positive emotions and not being defined by negative ones. So, for example, if I say, I'm angry, this is not a mindful statement. The mindful statement is anger arose within me. So in Buddhism, there is no discussion about the free will in the same way that you have in Western philosophy. But I associate this with kind of free will that you can gradually develop. So free will, that's not a question of having it or not having it. It's a question of kind of developing the free will muscles, so you can obtain more free will. That's my personal interpretation of Buddhist mindfulness, because if anger arises in me and I have no control over it, and then it's kind of like a passive experience of reality. You're led by the impulses and the predispositions of your mind, and you're not trying to amend them or change them. Whereas if you observe anger arising, then you actually have the free will to not react, to not be defined by it. So a lot of the time, like especially now in my life, I've been experiencing a lot of anxiety, and so when I apply mindfulness to it, then I'm not as defined by this anxiety as I otherwise would be. It's like there's this Leonard Cohen verse, there is a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. So I think that, being observers of our mind gives you options. Being defined by your emotions doesn't give you options. And so if I look at my have a kind of viewing thoughts like clouds in the sky, that thoughts and emotions that pass by, from my point of view at least, it kind of is the path toward liberation, as opposed to passively experiencing things. Is not a path to liberation. I am, as many of you know, have bipolar disorder. In many ways, it defines my life. To be honest, I often wished like that Dharma would magically heal my bipolar disorder. But when I experience depression, if I am mindful of it, it loses some of its power. Now, unfortunately, I can't I can't use mindfulness to make my depressions or anxiety go away, but I can observe it, and I can be less defined by it, and I can remember other states of mind. When I'm experiencing depression, I have a kind of an insight that I don't have to be defined by it. So that's sort of the mindfulness. It's a little bit like having a police officer, a good police officer, and your emotions kind of are like potential criminals, and the cop is there, and so they don't get to define you in the way that they would be without mindfulness. So that's the fuller definition of mindfulness, is living a life of the mind, right? So you have the idea of a life of the mind of a Western intellectual, encountering philosophical ideas and so on. Well, the life of the mind of a Buddhist is somebody who consistently works with their mind through different methods. And so the other thing I'd like to note is meditation. The actual word meditation, has been adopted from Christianity. That's its origin. And I think some people think that, in meditation, you kind of go deep inside yourself and have, mystical experiences, and then you're enlightened and you become one with the universe, kind of an idea. Meditation actually means habituation. So there are different types of meditations in Buddhism. So again, it's kind of like going back to the idea that you develop free will like a muscle, that you can increase your free will by working with your mind. So, the most famous meditation probably is shamatha meditation, calm abiding meditation, when you focus on something like your breath, or it could be an image of a flower, it could be Jesus Christ, but you're returning your mind to the object of meditation continuously. and you develop kind of focus. I almost kind of think about shamatha meditation as having like water in your palm and holding it, developing the discipline to hold it, and this water in your palm, and kind of the shamatha meaning like holding that object, learning to hold that object and returning, so that's, you're habituating your mind, and then you can progress to other forms of meditation. So there's analytic meditation, and where you are meditating on philosophy, on Buddhist philosophy. There is compassion meditation. So in compassion meditation, you take at the beginning somebody who loved you unconditionally. It could be usually it's your parents, maybe in your case it could be your grandmother or grandfather, whoever, somebody who had deep compassion toward you, and you have deep compassion toward them, and then you meditate on that, and then you spread that compassion from those people who really loved you to neutral people, and then from that you spread that compassion to people who you consider adversaries, or people who you're inclined to dislike. So that's an example of habituation, habituating yourself to compassion. And of course in Tibetan Buddhism there's the deity, meditation on a deity, where the deity has different qualities and aspects, and you're meditating on a deity, or you're meditating on yourself being a deity with all the enlightened aspects of it. So in a sense, meditation isn't meant to be this mystical journey where you connect with the universe, but rather it's like specific skills that you develop that you then use to obtain enlightenment. In Buddhism, there's an understanding that you can find a very blissful state of meditation, you can return to it, but you shouldn't, because that blissful state is not an enlightenment. So that's that. There are a couple of things I'd like to mention before closing the video. There's still some waving of my vaping device that needs to be done here before I feel good and proper that I should close the video. So if you study Buddhism in depth, then the actual cause of suffering is not attachment, it's ignorance. So ignorance is the better, like, misknowing. So ignorance is not just some passive state of like, I'm ignorant of Anna Karenina because I haven't read the book. I have read the book Anna Karenina, I'd recommend it. But anyway, so it's not that type of ignorance. The ignorance that Buddhism are talking about is an active misconception of reality that is ingrained in us right now. And so out of that ignorance, attachment is born, and then it causes suffering. So the ultimate source of pain, the ultimate source of everything negative, is ignorance, misknowing. So it's an act of misknowing. So it's like the way I look at it is, I'm sure you're familiar with Plato's cave, where people are sitting and they're looking in the cave, and they're seeing the reflection of the lights on the wall of the cave, and they think that this is reality. And if somebody tries to move them or tell them that that's actually not the reality, they attack them. So it's an active ignorance. And what ignorance does is seeing things as existing inherently. In reality, things arise because of dependent origination. They exist as interdependence. They don't exist in this solitary way that they appear to us. They're actually empty of inherent existence. They don't have an inherent existence in the way that we see things. But because we view things as having inherently existing, that provides the foundation for grasping at these things and believing in giving qualities to external things that they don't actually possess. Overinvestment, reification of things, of objects. When in reality they're just designations. They don't kind of exist in the way that they appeal to us, in the way that they appear to us. So this is Madhyamaka philosophy, and actually I made a whole video about it in my introduction to Tibetan Buddhism series that I did. I actually kind of regret making that video because I really I knew less about the philosophy than I think that I did. Madhyamaka philosophy, Madhyamaka means the middle way. So it's a philosophy of the middle way between nihilism, that nothing exists, and eternalism, that that seems like things are inherently existing forever. And so the Nagarjuna, who I referenced earlier, the philosopher of Madhyamaka, he said that if you have to get stuck in one of these extremes, it's better to be in the extreme of eternalism rather than in the extreme of nihilism. Because if you fall into the extreme of nihilism and you think nothing exists and nothing matters, then you might commit crimes and do horrible things. And so the goal of a practitioner of Buddhism in contemplating Madhyamaka philosophy is not to fall into these extremes, in the extreme of eternalism or nihilism. Both are wrong. But this is a very deep topic, and like I said already, I thought I understood it, but the more I study it, the less certain I am of talking about it, because it's very kind of rich and interesting, and it really something that brings me back to Buddhism is the emptiness philosophy. So the final thing I'd like to address is rebirth, because because of how it reflects on the Four Noble Truths. So the way I presented the Four Noble Truths was primarily psychological, but there's also a metaphysical component, a traditional rebirth component to it. So according to the law, according to karma, a person can have very good karma, right? And so they might suffer very little, if at all. Maybe the biggest suffering they experience is, that they're waiting for the Friday to eat the burger, right? So there are people who have easy lives, and you can you could point to a person, an old person who died in their sleep when they were 87, without any suffering. They had a full, rich life. They have had a great career and whatever, and you say, well, you Buddhists say that that life is suffering. Well, what about this person? Well, from a Buddhist point of view, they have accumulated good karma, and this karma could last, half of your life. Half of your life is easy, then it gets difficult, or it might last your whole life. You have an easy life, and maybe you have 100 easy lives, but then eventually that good karma is gonna vanish. It's gonna go away, and you're gonna be still stuck in the cycle of existence. So that's naturally a view. So if you believe in this, then all the pursuits in the external world are in the nature of dukkha, because you're not working with your mind, because you're not exiting samsara, you're not exiting cyclic existence. So from the traditional Buddhist point of view, there are hells. Like one Lama joked, they said, people don't think we have a hell, we actually have 17. I think there are 17 hells, I don't know. There's the hungry ghost realms, and then there are heavens. And so in these heavens, beings experience very little suffering. But eventually, there are good karma that brought them to their heaven, and they might have spent, thousands of lives of years in this heaven, eventually good karma runs out and they're back suffering with the rest of us, or even worse. So from that point of view, it makes sense to become a renunciate, or at least, a lay practitioner or something, so you can exit eventually the cycle of existence. You cannot win, like the casino always wins, right? So that's kind of how you are with samsara. You might win a few times, but ultimately you're fucked, So from that point of view, external pursuits in the external world, they're laced with suffering, because, you can't win the casino unless you leave the game. However, you can set that aside and look at Buddhism as Buddhist psychology. So you can say, okay, I don't believe in rebirth. I might not believe that all suffering comes from attachment, but surely, it's an interesting perspective, psychological perspective to look at it. You could at least say that at least some suffering comes from attachment, and it's an interesting psychological perspective. I'm not going to become a Buddhist, but it's interesting to maybe explore mindfulness, maybe explore meditation, other aspects of Buddhism, and yeah, so that's that, and that's really my desire in making this video, is to just give you a different perspective on things. I don't expect you to become a Buddhist. It's not my agenda to make you into a Buddhist, but it's an interesting, psychological view, and I think it's worth contemplating, even if you're not going to adopt it. So yeah, that's my kind of only wish, is to, please also don't define Buddhism by this presentation. I'm just kind of an ordinary person. I'm sure I may have said something wrong. I don't know. So don't, I don't want to, I'm not like I don't want to present myself as an expert on Buddhism in any way whatsoever. I'm just a person wrestling with reality, and in dealing with reality, or trying to find meaning of life or something, I haven't found anything better than Tibetan Buddhism. It has enriched my life. It has given me hope where I had periods where I had no hope. It has enriched my life, yeah. So hopefully, you enjoyed this video, and thank you so much for watching, and I hope all the good things happen to you, and you're never parted from those things and those people that you love.